Is it just me, or have you ever heard the expression, oh no, Scrum doesn't work for us? Scrum isn't working. Or someone comes up to you and says, you're doing Scrum all wrong. Are you finding that Scrum isn't working for you or for your organization? Do you constantly find you're never quite able to complete your sprint backlog? And even when you get close, it never really feels like success. You're more of a feature factory than anything else, or doing Scrum by name only. Well, it's almost certainly because of one thing. What is it? I thought you'd never ask. I've been using Scrums with teams in all different types of product and service development in a variety of organizations for over 20 years, almost 25. Why have I been doing this so long? And when Scrum fatigue sets in, it's almost always because the teams are not using a sprint or product goal because or because they're using them the wrong way, right? So if you've really tried to use a sprint or product goal properly, but find that the work you're doing just doesn't lend itself to one, keep listening because I'm going to make sure we talk about this and address that issue. Now, if you're not using a sprint or product goal in the right way, you'll end up turning into Scrum or Scrum, but why? Because you end up focusing on getting all the stories taken into a sprint done, which is the wrong thing to focus on. Yes, the purpose of sprint is not never has been to get all the stories done. Things like story points and burn down charts are the wrong things to focus on, and we've been doing that forever. Those type of things make you chase completion of each story taken into a sprint because you want to get that burn down chart down to zero, or because you want your velocity to either hit what you said it would or do a little bit better so you're improving or increasing. Because we know about continuous improvement, Kaizen, right? Those type of things drive me crazy because they're all time-based metrics and they're focused on time completion, and it's enough to start a fire that you can't put out. We use Scrum, but we can't set a sensible goal, or we ignore it, or we create a generic goal like complete all the stories in a sprint or finish testing the stories from a previous sprint. Now, if you're a Scrum Master, you really need to get to grips with this. You are the expert in Scrum, and you should know the Scrum Guide inside out. You should know the Agile Manifesto, have it memorized. The product and sprint goal are fundamental to Scrum, and it's your responsibility to help make sure that we are creating it and that we are using it properly. So let's be clear. To get benefits or full benefits of Scrum, you need to be working on a single product or service, or at least have the majority of your team dedicated to working on a single product or service goal. There needs to be a clear vision and strategy provided by the product owner. You can talk to me more about this. I call it the Agile press release. From that vision and strategy, you need to have clear goals identified for execution to execute against a strategy. You work on one product goal at a time. The product owner will help decide when enough has been achieved against this goal in order to move on to the next goal. The product backlog should only contain work that's related to the goal that you're focused on. Each sprint is dedicated to creating value towards a product goal. And in the end, the team decides on a single sprint goal that will help them get closer to realizing the product goal. Look, if you don't do this to reduce your ability, if you don't do this, you're reducing your ability to innovate and inspect and adapt during a sprint. You're just pretty much killing it. Does your sprint feel like a miniature waterfall? If you're just starting to do Scrum or Agile, it may, because there's a process of learning, in which case it does feel like you're doing miniature waterfalls for a short time until you adapt and get used to and understand the benefit of implementing the full Scrum and Agile workflow. If this does feel this way, lots of times it's because you create all the stories up front prior to the sprint. You focus on getting all the stories in a sprint done and reflect on it in the end. Well, guess what? That is a miniature waterfall. There's no opportunity for growth or change or anything in there. Instead, Scrum teams should focus on a specific sprint goal, such as set up the deployment pipeline and release an empty site to production. You can generate a few stories prior to the sprint, but you shouldn't try to reinvent or invent everything. This mentality a lot of times is referred to as Scrumban, where you have some things that are core as part of your Scrum framework, which take up a percentage allocation of your story points, and then you allow the remaining story points for more of a Kanban flow for things that you didn't think of or for new things that come in. It's one of the many reasons I believe there's no value in applying time to story points. You shouldn't do that. And I never use burn down charts. I think that sometimes when you're using burn down charts and you're focusing on things like time-based created metrics, you're literally wasting time by focusing on time. I'm going to say that again because that's a pretty cool quote. You're wasting time by focusing on time. You need to figure out how to get there without. So if you want to have metrics that actually have value, you need to start figuring out some flow metrics like cumulative flow diagram, and things along those lines. They're going to help you really see how your product is progressing. If you don't use a sprint goal currently, the first thing that usually happens is that it causes a lack of alignment against the product backlog. You need to focus on that first. Yeah, teams will take items into a sprint from the backlog, and but they said that. I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. Teams like to take items into the sprint, and they like to make sure they achieve the items into the sprint, and they focus so much on the actual items that they pull in from the product backlog into the sprint that a lot of times they drive their work based on what they're doing and create silos, and they only focus on what's happening with them and ignore the outside world around them. This happens because the individual team members work on single items by themselves instead of limiting work in progress and swarming to work on additional items. If there was a shared goal to bring them together, the items they're working on would essentially relate because, well, they're all working together to create something instead of building a miniature waterfall. If you can't do this correctly, it leads to lack of focus and causes the daily stand-up, the daily scrum, to be a status update. I'm sure you've all been there before. So because everyone's working on separate items, it's not possible to talk about progress towards a single valuable increment or goal because there isn't one. The daily scrum should be all about progress towards the goal. Does anything need to change? Do we need to pivot or adjust? It also makes it more difficult to define a roadmap based on outcomes for the product, and it makes it hard to engage with stakeholders. They simply can't see the value in a sprint as a whole. It can make sprint review sessions difficult or even pointless. Why bother having a demo if it's all disparate items? Another side effect of not having a sprint goal is it increases the team's work in progress and increases context switching, which results in reduced morale, lower quality work over time, and it increases time to deliver and increases cost of what we're going to deliver. It basically blows everything up. So what I'm trying to say is that the essence of doing Scrum correctly can fix 90% of the problems that you're facing doing Scrum. It's very hard to respond to change when you've got a lot of unrelated work. But if you've got a single shared goal, it becomes much easier. It reduces innovation time, inspect and adapt element, empiricism, and it slims down everything. It slims down all the time you're spending in meetings. It clarifies everything you're trying to do. This is not the way you're supposed to work together on a problem during a sprint if you're only silo focused. If you don't have a sprint goal, you need to be adjusting and figuring out what you can do to get there. You need to sit down and have a chat about it. I mentioned earlier, if you already tried using a sprint goal, but the work you're doing just doesn't lend itself to one, I have some pointers. If you discover that having a sprint goal is hurtful, then you probably shouldn't be doing Scrum. Let me say that again. If you discover having a sprint goal isn't helping, you probably shouldn't be doing Scrum. You almost certainly don't have a single product or service, and very likely multiple product owners or stakeholders are feeding a backlog that reflects several unrelated things. It's like trying to crowbar what you're doing into Scrum framework, and you need to beg for the misery to stop. If that's the case, Scrum's the wrong framework for you. If you want to try Kanban, try Kanban. It may work much better if you're doing lots of disparate small things. If you're just using a language of Scrum but not receiving any benefit, then why use Scrum at all? The sprint and product goal are fundamental to Scrum, so there's little or no benefit without them. It's simply not designated for your scenario. Using Kanban doesn't mean you have to abandon planning altogether, retros, or even a Scrum Master role. You can still have all those things, but probably reduce the cadence of, for example, sprint length to 1 week or none, or reduce your daily meetups. I urge you to think seriously if you find a scenario is that you're having trouble with sprint goals, and start trying to figure out why and make the necessary adjustments to get there. I promise you'll be glad that you did. That's going to do it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at AgileDad.com. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.